Welcome back, students. We're working now, moving into chapter 4. The textbook chapter is on genre or type or style or ism. We'll get into that in just a minute when we move into the PowerPoint presentation. But hey, I wanted to tell you the 1-minute plays were really, really good. I had a great time reading them. Your choice of content material, the conflicts that you set up between the characters, really the dialogue format. I think you had a really good concept of how to write a play. And I would like to see some of you go into playwriting because I think you do have that kind of technique, and your writing skills are really good. So I was really pleased with those. I'm trying to set up a DoodleCom announcement, so watch for this. It will be an announcement to let me know when you might be free. You have some free time, and I can schedule either a Zoom session where we can go over and have read some of those 1-minute plays so you get a better idea of what was submitted, because I think they're really good and I think you'd enjoy that. Also, your quizzes were really good. I thought you did a good job. I can tell that you're reading the chapters and listening to the PowerPoints and going through the videos. My one suggestion to you on those quizzes is make sure that you go through the PowerPoint presentation video and the videos, because those quiz questions are geared towards that discussion. You do answer a lot of the questions from the textbook, but some of those questions I take from the PowerPoint because it's kind of my ideas and what I think you should know beyond the textbook. So just be aware of that. For example, sometimes there's 2 points on a question, and I'll give you 1 point for the definition and then an example. But some of those are taken from PowerPoints. A good example was those 3 terms: theater, the theater, and drama, where I really wanted you to look at the script, and I really wanted you to think of role playing, and the theater is a place where you go. Speaking of role playing, I sent you a message, an announcement that I hope you received and would take some time and do this. There's an amazing event happening in the world today with the death of Queen Elizabeth and the funeral that is happening. I mean, it is a perfect theatrical event. So it really focuses on everything we talk about this semester. Talk about pageantry and symbols and choreography and directing and staging and costumes and design. And boy, it's just one of those good theatrical events, kind of like the Olympics, where you just see this is what a theatrical event is, and this is how theater plays a major part in your daily life. So good. So now let's go into the new PowerPoint presentation. It might be a little boring for you because this gets into a lot of technique, a lot of writing technique, but that's okay. The one thing that I want you to realize from this chapter is that whenever we have a theatrical event, we must kind of put it into a type or a category. It's a classification. It's a way we classify stories or scripts, or that we take the tool and we classify it. 2 of the major ones would be realism and anti-realism. Everything usually fits into a realistic genre or an anti-real genre. A lot of the films that you see, especially in the sci-fi stuff, those are anti-real when you get into the fantasy characters. And then the realistic dramas are those that you see where characters are really representing characters on stage. So those are the 2 main types of theater and theatrical events. But there's this kind of interesting term called genre, and it's a French word meaning type or category. You've probably heard several of these: tragedy, comedy, melodrama, farce, tragicomedy. There's several of them, but these 4 are probably the main ones. And I'm going to go through and kind of describe those. The textbook talks a lot about it, but sometimes that information in there, especially in this chapter, can get a little technical and a little dry. So I'm hoping that I can maybe filter it out for you. So these isms, protagonist, antagonist, these terms right here are also really important for you for new quizzes coming up. And as I said, I think you should have some terminology. And so these are the terms that I bring out in this chapter. They're not necessarily in the textbook, but I do think they're important when we start talking about genre. This first one, ism, I'm sure you've heard of it. It's a little word that you kind of see at the ends of some words, like feminism, racism, realism, naturalism, surrealism, impressionism, all those kinds of words, socialism. Um, it's a word that's put at the end of the word, and what it means is it is a broader study of that word. For example, if you have the word race, then we'll study race. But if you have the word racism, it opens it up to all kinds of different kinds of discussions. And so that's kind of what that little word is at the very end. We use it especially in a lot of the art movements and the theater movements. The protagonist and the antagonist, this is an interesting combination of two words. You probably read them or heard about them in your English class studies. They're a little bit different in the theater world. The protagonist, the definition of the protagonist is the event. It can be an event. It can be a group of people. But it's the individual, the group, or the events that the play revolves around or the story revolves around. Now, it doesn't necessarily have to be a good person or a bad person. It can be either, but it's the central focus of the event, the theatrical event, of what the entire event revolves around. So right now you're seeing the funeral and death of Queen Elizabeth, which I sent you out a message. I hope you got it. And if you get a chance, really look at that, find some time and go through and watch some of that that's happening in the United Kingdom with her funeral. I mean, you talk about a theatrical event. It is an amazing, perfect example of what a theatrical event is and how theater is a part of our everyday lives. The pageantry, the symbolism, the characters, the conflict, the choreography, the staging. It's really quite amazing. So anyway, she is now the protagonist of this event that is happening in the UK. The antagonist, the definition of antagonist is the force that's fighting against. It is it can be an event, a person, a group of antagonists, or a person, an individual that goes against the protagonist. So that's kind of interesting. That sets up the conflict of the drama. These three kind of ideas and terms I really like a lot because I use them in directing. What is the major dramatic question? What is the major dramatic question of the story? For example, can a woman who is so possessed with greed find happiness? Well, that's from a specific play called Little Foxes. But that is the major question, the major dramatic question of the story or the conflict. The major dramatic answer then would be the play or the story itself. Well, when you get through with the production, watching the theatrical event, you say, oh, yes, she can, or no, she cannot. The major confrontation scene is where the hero meets the villain. In a lot of movies you see, televisions you see, plays that you see, this is where the hero meets the villain. The major confrontation scene is the major climax. Style is a term that you're very familiar with because each of you have your own style. As I was talking about the other day when we were talking about your costumes, your costume shop that you have in your apartment or your home, you have your own particular style. What is your style? And I think it's important for you to know what your style is. To me, style is knowing what type of play you're in. So, for example, for your life, knowing what type of life you are in. What is your style? What is your theatrical event? When you go out and you meet people and you communicate with individuals, what is the kind of style that you bring to that particular moment of communication? So it's the way you dress, the way you act. We have different kinds of styles or traditions we set up for holidays, for Christmas, for Thanksgiving. Your family will go through a particular style, the way they present themselves, a tradition at Christmas and Thanksgiving. So that's an interesting, I'd like you to take a little bit of time and say, well, Kai, what is my style? It's very interesting. You kind of look at yourself in the mirror and go, what is my style? It's kind of hard, very difficult. But it's an interesting word that we use throughout the theatrical event. Climax is when that hero and the villain come together and they confront each other. That's where the rising action has built to a point where we cannot go any further, that there must be a confrontation scene to either finish the show off, finish the title off, finish the script off. And that's where we move into the next one called the denouement. The denouement is the falling action. or basically it is the tying up of the ends. It's the ending of the play. For example, Shakespeare's plays usually have four or five different kind of plots going on at the same time. Well, Shakespeare is a brilliant playwright to where he wraps all of those up together. So at the very end of the show or his text, there is no question how the play ends. So it's the denouement, the falling action. So those are the terminology I'd like you to keep in mind. So let's talk about tragedy. There are two types of tragedy. And tragedy is a serious drama where there is a downfall of the primary character. There's a traditional tragedy where we talk about significant periods from the past. Usually the traditional tragedy is going to be during the classic period or the romantic period through the Renaissance, usually from the Greeks up to and including the Jacobean period. And then we have the modern tragedy plays from the late 19th century, 1800 to the present. So traditional tragedy and modern tragedy. And they're different. They're kind of what's different about them is that the major figure has a different kind of downfall or ending to the tragedy. So we have traditional tragedy. Traditional tragedies must have tragic heroes or royal families. For example, we do have in Oedipus and Hamlet. Oedipus is about a royal family, Oedipus the king, Hamlet the same thing. It is about a tragic hero or a royal family. For example, Oedipus, you might have read the story in high school or you've heard of the story. Oedipus is the character that murders his father and marries his mother. It's one of those great Greek tragic stories that is quite interesting. And so it is about Oedipus as a young boy finding out he is king and what he does in the process of going through that as a hero and his tragedy that flaws. What happens to Oedipus is he has a tragic flaw called pride. And pride is a huge tragic flaw, not for just Oedipus or Hamlet, but for all of us. And too much pride can cause our downfall. And that's basically what happens to Oedipus. Usually the tragic figure has a downfall, a tragic flaw, which causes the downfall. And when that downfall or cognition, the understanding happens, then the tragic hero must accept what the individual has done. For example, Oedipus finds out what he has done. He's murdered his father and married his mother. So he must suffer and go into exile. That's the difference between the tragic hero of the traditional tragedy and the modern hero of the modern tragedy is that the tragic figure must go into exile and suffer for the rest of his life. The modern tragic hero usually commits suicide. That's a different in cultures, I guess. Tragic verse usually plays in this period or in lofty and profound ideas in poetry. That's sometimes where we really can't understand what Shakespeare's saying in his play, so we don't listen to them or see them because they're done in tragic verse. And there's that word again that we did on our quiz, tragedy arouses pity and fear in the audience, and that's when that cathartic experience happens. So here's modern tragedy. What is the meaning of our lives? This is a wonderful play called Death of a Salesman. It is one of the more major American dramas. There is a video in this chapter from Arthur Miller, who wrote this play. So you can kind of go in and listen to him talk about the play that he wrote. But it's a great drama. It's about a salesman called Willie Loman. And Willie Loman has two boys, Biff and Happy. And they're really losers. Both of them are high school football players. He thinks that they're going to go out and solve the problems of the world, get good jobs, but they basically really don't. And so they come back and they discover that their father, Willie, who is a salesman, has been a salesman all his life, has been cheating on the mother, Linda, and there's a big confrontation between all four of them. Probably the most important thing, most wonderful moment of this play at the very, very end is when Linda has her requiem as after Willie has committed suicide. He's gone in the garage and hooked up tubes to the car, the muffler, and has committed suicide that way. So in the very last moment of the play, Linda turns to the audience as she's at his graveside and says, "Forgive me, Linda. Forgive me, Willie. I can't cry. We've paid off the bills. We've done everything, but I can't cry. I don't understand why." And that's the kind of the tragedy of the modern drama. There is an incredible new Broadway show that's going to open in a couple of weeks of an all-black cast that's coming to Broadway doing Death of a Salesman. So that is our modern tragedy. We do have a heroic drama. It's a different type of play. That's where the hero or the noble figure goes through kind of in a melodramatic way, but it has a happy ending. That's the difference between the modern tragedy and the heroic drama. The hero wins out, or good wins out over bad. We do have domestic drama, or what we call the bourgeoisie, the middle class. These are plays about the middle class. There are two here that I think are really important. A Streetcar Named Desire. You might have seen an old movie, a Tennessee Williams play. But wonderful, wonderful kind of discussion of the characters of Stanley and Stella and the sister Blanche, who comes in and has to live with them because she has lost her fortune. And so that is another tragedy that is set up. It has to do with modern drama. It is about the middle class, us, not the royal class. It is about the bourgeoisie. This particular play is an interesting. The reason why I put this one is because this is a play that I had experience to see in New York several years ago when I took some students to New York. It's called The Lower Depths by Emile Zola. When I saw that particular production, it was done in pure naturalism. There's that ism again. Naturalism is a slice of life, meaning you see everything that is happening in real life. Everything that's on stage is going to be a slice of life. For example, I was running around the city, New York City, with the students, showing them the city, and we came across this flyer that said, "Okay, urgent. There is a Russian acting company in New York City from Moscow that will be performing The Lower Depths tonight at this particular theater." And of course, I said, "Well, a theater from acting company from Moscow, who really invented realism, who is the oldest form of modern drama. Students, we have to go see this play." So we went to the box office. When we went up to the window to get our tickets, there was this horrible smell. And I just thought it was the trash of New York, the streets of New York City, but it was this awful, awful smell. And I walked to get the tickets, and it even got worse inside the theater. But anyway, I picked up the tickets and left, took the students around the city, and then we came back that night. Well, as the audience were standing outside the theater that night, waiting that anticipation of the magic moment we talked about earlier, the box office opened, and the ushers opened the doors, and all of a sudden, here's that horrible smell comes out, and just all of us gasped because it was such a distinct, awful, awful stench that we were smelling as we were walking into the theater. And so the audience was kind of concerned about this, and they should be concerned because they started walking down the aisles of the theater. When the ushers were taking them down the aisle to their seats, we realized that we were walking in trash. We were walking in it's almost like all of the trash bags of New York City had been opened and thrown all over the seats in the theater and the aisles of the theater. So we were walking through, just horrible, horrible trash, as if you would go out to the landfill and you'd be walking through all the garbage out there. It's like what we were doing. Well, it was kind of interesting to see that audience because, we were college dressed students, college age. And then there were, of course, upper class, the rich with their meeks and furs. All of us were walking in this garbage to get to our seat. When we took our seat, we had to brush off the seat of the trash because it was all over the place. And I turned to the students and I was talking to them. I said, there's a reason for this, and I think it's a particular style that they are doing. Remember, it's from Russia, and the play is really strongly slice of life. It's about a young individual called Luca who is living in the slums of Russia, and he's trying to escape the slums of Russia. So as we looked at the program, I noticed at the very bottom of the program, it said, for your information, the actors in this production have not showered or changed clothes in over a year. Well, that kind of explained everything. I said to the students, yeah, they're doing pure naturalism, a slice of life, where you're going to be really as if you were in the slums of Moscow. So that's kind of the story of that particular play, naturalism, but it had to do with the middle class, lower depths, a wonderful script, and quite an interesting production. Problems, domestic drama is problems of the family or home, excuse me, and the bourgeois drama, people of the middle or the lower classes. Then we have melodrama. Melodrama is made popular during the 19th century. It emphasized action and spectacular effects. You have seen melodrama every time you go see a huge epic movie. For example, when you went to see Braveheart, or when you go to see the dinosaurs, those particular films are underscored with this fantastic, amazing orchestral underscoring, and it goes through the entire movie. And what that does is that music, when it underscores the action, it really emphasizes and heightens the emotions of what you're seeing on stage. So that is a technique that is used in melodrama. Melodrama is usually stock characters. They are clearly defined villains and heroes. Stock characters are characters that we will discuss when we talk about history and the Commedia dell'arte players from the Italian Renaissance. This is a wonderful script called Arsenic on Lace. It's about these two little old ladies who poison individuals they don't think are happening good for the world or bringing good into the world. So they invite them into their house. They give them some elderberry wine, which has poison in it, and they stash them and they bury them in the basement of the house. Well, that's a melodrama. They're fun. They're really fun. We have melodrama, hero and villain. We have cartoons that are melodrama. It's one of those kind of old techniques. But what's the big technique is that music underscores. So every time you see a production, a theatrical event, and there is music all the way through that movie, it's underscored. That is probably a melodrama technique. Here's your comedy. These are types of comedy. Comedy is unpredictable consequences. Circumstances are turned upside down. They're humorous use of words, the same sound, different meaning. Stock characters again. Coincidence and mistaken identity. You've seen a lot of comedy. Burlesque was one of the early types of comedy that came over from Europe when theater started in America. It's a gross exaggeration of movement, vulgarity, variety show, satire, intellectual, moral, and political wit, exposes evil and foolishness. Comedy of manner are those shows, theatrical events where we make fun of the upper class. Moliere was a great playwright of the Renaissance that did a comedy of manners. And then the delivery of the play is really what's very, very important. Tragic comedy. So the next slides are just kind of a detailed kind of more information about these types and styles. Tragic comedy is a play with tragic themes and noble characters. A happy ending underscored with music. It's a wonderful production called The Seagull by one of Russia's great playwrights, who was considered to be a comedian, although he wrote some of the most wonderful dramatic plays and dramatic scripts. But he's classified as a humorist, which is kind of interesting. He writes a play called The Seagull. Characteristics of tragedy. The play concerns a serious subject. Excuse me, this allergies. The protagonist is a heroic figure of heroic proportions, which we talked about. What should happen, must happen. Emotions of pity and fear, where we get catharsis. The protagonist must meet defeat, and out of defeat comes the catharsis. And the protagonist, let me hide this right here. That's not what I want to hide. Sorry. I want to hide this. I'm thinking this is on your screen. The protagonist may go into exile and suffer. We talked about that. So this is kind of a little bit more definition of the types of genre that we are discussing. Characteristic of melodrama, again, subject seriously. Characters are mostly drawn, more loosely drawn. That creates a stronger empathic response. It's usually episodic, underscored with music. It borders on sentimentality, and the protagonist does win the battle. Characteristics of comedy treats its subject in a lighter vein, even though the subject may be in a serious one, provokes what we call thoughtful laughter. It's both possible and probable, and grows out of character rather than situation. And it's usually honest in its portrayal of life. And then we have what I like to direct is farce. Let me move this over. Characteristics of farce. It has as its object riotous laughter and escape. It asks the audience to accept certain improbabilities, but from that point proceeds in a lifelike manner. Is possible, but not very probable. For example, these are the kind of theatrical events where there's a lot of chasing going on in the movie. Cars are chasing each other. People are chasing each other through doors and in and out of doors. Very, 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 very fast paced and very exaggerated movement. It's dominated by situation rather than the character, and it calls for little or no thought. It's where you just go and have pure entertainment. And it must move rapidly in an episodic manner. It is believable, but only for the moment. So, class, I wanted you to just kind of go through this chapter. I know it's a little bit of information that you don't really necessarily need to know or want to know, but I do think it's important that you understand how we classify and how we put particular kinds of theatrical events into categories. Because as an actor and a director, I then have to make sure that I know what the rules are, the guidelines for that. So, hey, have a great week. That's chapter 4. Our next quiz will not be until after chapter 6. So enjoy the week and study hard.